Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Tuesday, December 17th, 2024. Time for yet another show. We move on with the week. Remember, we are in government shutdown week once again. I don't really know. I don't know if I've gotten a good read on what's likely to happen, although the news outlets are starting to wake up to the reality that this is looming. But I guess the fact that there aren't any there's a shortage anyway of panicked articles about, well, what will happen if there's a government shutdown, leads me to believe that I guess the leadership in both parties in both houses are just saying, well, we'll come up with something and we'll pass it. It doesn't really matter very much. I think the stakes are lower now for Republicans than they usually are, as they're looking most often to make some sort of very often a weird and outlandish ideological statement with their anything to do with budgeting and appropriations. But here I think they're looking forward to the Trump presidency, a majority in both houses, and just saying, well, we'll kick the can a little further down the road, allow a more or less clean CR to go through, and then destroy the budget later on, I guess. And there's really not that much that Democrats can do about it. And if they were to score some huge victory, somehow leveraging their majority in the Senate while they still have it, it would, just be undone in a couple of weeks anyway by majorities in both houses. Although, again, the House situation always touch and go. That's true. Okay. Well, what might be on your mind this morning is occupying a lot of time on social media, the leadership elections. You may have heard, we've been discussing it over the past couple of days, that over in the Oversight Committee, the contest is on for the ranking member position, the ranking minority member position, the minority's top person on the committee, acts in many ways as something of a counterpart to the chairperson of the committee, though they don't have nearly as much power. But, there's not a great deal of power involved in being the ranking minority member, although it does afford you certain privileges in terms of consultation with the chair about hearings and witnesses that are going to go on and advocating for your fellow caucus members on the committee. It's a thing, and it's a rung on the leadership ladder. And at the moment, the contest is between Gerry Connolly, suburban Virginia, close-in D.C. area representative, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And I think you're all probably aware of that. And I've been telling you for many years that the best way to make a quick and dirty prediction, if you don't know anything else about who might win a leadership position, is to take a look at their leadership PACs. And a very easy way of doing it is over at opensecrets.org. And you can you can get there. Either you can Google search first without remembering Open Secrets. If you just look for the member of Congress that you're interested in and leadership PAC, most often it will lead you to Open Secrets. And if not directly to that page, let's go through it now just so you can all do this yourself. So, for instance, let's see, Gerry Connolly's name has fewer keystrokes involved. So we'll start with him. Gerry Connolly, leadership PAC. And I'm not enclosing any part of it in quotes, just the name of the member of Congress and the words leadership PAC. And I think probably most of you have been listening for long enough to know what I even mean by leadership PAC. And if you don't, if you're new to the show, and we're supposed to hope that there are new people listening all the time, and so we should go back over old ground and explain these things. But I think we're a pretty steady crowd, as it turns out. But a leadership PAC, for those uninitiated, I guess, ordinarily every member of Congress usually the ones who succeed and get there to be members of Congress, of course, have campaign committees, which is where ordinary folks like you and I might donate $10 or $15 or $25 every once in a while to support a candidate that we want to see in Congress, even if they're not our own member of Congress, whatever, stuff like that. But that goes directly to their campaign accounts. They're able to spend it on, valid campaign expenses, and they can, in some cases, pass some of that money on to other campaigns. The leadership PAC is designed for that purpose, actually. And, of course, there's limitations, or there used to be limitations on how much any one person could give to any one campaign. And we used to measure these things by saying someone had maxed out. They give the maximum amount possible to someone's campaign fund that they really support. They can give them even more money. How can they do that? Well, for one thing, you could just break the law and just pile Bitcoin on them or something, or spend $270 million on their campaign, whatever. But the traditional way of soliciting even more money and doing wonderful things with it, I'm sure, one way is the leadership PAC. And if you happen to have tremendous fundraising prowess, you start a leadership PAC. And when someone has maxed out to your campaign, they've given, I think, I don't remember the old numbers that are still in my head, and I don't know if they've been raised, about $5,200, I think, is the maximum that a household, a person, see, it's all dumb rules. I think the per person maximum, back in the day when I actually remember the numbers, was something like $2,600 per individual per race, essentially. Like, I could give, the max would be, I would give $2,600 to Joe Smith in his primary race and $2,600 for his general election race, even if they hadn't held the primary yet, or actually sometimes even when they've, I guess late in the game, people will, double up. And they'll say, well, that $2,600 was for the primary. The other $2,600 is for the general election. And my recollection is that you could even do that after the primary. Well, I'm paying his campaign debts from the primary. So, even at the last minute in the general election, you could dump $5,200 on somebody. But you also can give money on behalf of your spouse as well. So, the true max is like around $10,000. Anyway, if you've given somebody the maximum amount of money and you just love them to death and you want to give them some more money, if they have a leadership PAC, you can donate to that. Now, the leadership PAC is very often named in a way that it associates it with that member. If you're from Montana, you might have a Big Sky PAC, or you might try and come up with an acronym that incorporates your name that spells something out, or, your name is Gerry Connolly, you might have Gerry PAC or something like that. That's not what he has. But as a matter of fact, we can tell you the name of his leadership PAC in just a minute. But, right, so what you do is you can collect additional money, another $10,000 from big donors, and you can put it in your leadership PAC, and that is usable for it's most often used for passing on contributions to other members of Congress, colleagues who are in tough races, colleagues who are not in tough races, colleagues you like, colleagues you wish would like you, whatever the excuse may be. You also can spend it on a number of other things. For instance, Rick Santorum famously abused his leadership PAC by having it pay for meals and travel and other accommodations as he traveled around the country raising money for his leadership PAC to give away to other people. And he always used his leadership PAC to pay for Starbucks and for Arby's, very famously, sometimes for himself, sometimes for whatever campaign aides might be traveling with him, sometimes for the whole office. And but it's also very much or very often used by some members anyway, as a lifestyle PAC. That is to say, there's a lot of work that goes into raising the amount of money involved in things like this. And if you're traveling the country, your leadership PAC can pay for your hotel stay while you're in California campaigning for a colleague, something like that. And then it branches out from there. People get more and more creative with it. But what it also does, and why it's important to leadership races is, well, that first word, leadership PAC, right? It's chiefly supposed to be used for passing out money to other colleagues. And then when you are running for a leadership position later on or right away or whatever it is, your colleagues can think back fondly on how much help you were to them and weigh it appropriately and decide whether or not they will support you in your bid for a leadership post. And the more colleagues you have convinced of your leadership skills and abilities by sending them money in the amount of, $5,000 or so, then, the better you do in one of these elections. It comes into play mostly really in actual caucus leadership positions when people are running for speaker, majority leader, majority whip, chief majority whip, caucus chair, DCCC chair, although that's usually more of a punishment than anything else. And sometimes in these races for leadership on the committees as well, and there's a little twist that comes into the committee races. Maybe I'll remember to get back to this. But as I was telling you, if you wanted to look up leadership PACs and you search Gerry Connolly, leadership PAC, and click on it, you'll actually come to Gerry Connolly's page on open secrets. It's usually at the top of the search results as well. Anyway, so the page will display, and it will be displaying by default the latest election cycles data for, if you look across the top of or the middle of the screen where you have some choices, it'll say now showing data for the 2024 election cycle for the campaign committee only, and you see the little down arrow thing that suggests that there is a menu to be clicked on. And if you do click on it, your choices are, show me the data either for the campaign committee only, that is, Gerry Connolly for Congress or whatever they decide to call it, that is meant to be spent on his race for Congress. And there's also the leadership PAC profile only, or you can look at them both in combination if you just want to see all the money that flows through Gerry Connolly's hands for whatever reason. But if you click on the leadership PAC profile only, it will bring you to it, and it'll even somewhere throw up the name. There it is. If you scroll down a little bit, his leadership PAC is known as the Commonwealth PAC. Commonwealth of Virginia, of course, is what he's talking about. Similarly, you can find the same thing for, I figured I was going to end up taping it in anyway, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez leadership PAC. There it is. Click on it. And we'll look at the leadership PAC so we can get the name of it and see what clever name she's given to her thing. It is called Courage to Change. So, as I said, a quick and dirty estimation of the chances that various candidates have in leadership races can very often be found by taking a quick glance. How much money has been raised by the candidates, sometimes two, sometimes multiple candidates. A better measure than that, of course, is how much money has been spent out of those leadership PACs. That's a better indication. That will give you a closer look at, well, how many colleagues might owe a debt of gratitude to this candidate for leadership. That's, and so the amount of money spent is a decent proxy if that money hasn't all been spent on Arby's and Starbucks or more legitimate uses, but still nonetheless not handed out to candidates directly. Where is this going? If you take a quick look at the amount of money Gerry Connolly gave out in the 2024 election cycle, you will see $177,948 currently reported. So, about 175 in terms of outgoing funds from the leadership PAC this election cycle. What about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? Well, a quick glance will tell you, holy mackerel, $541,902 outgoing, spent on this in this election cycle by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So that would seem to indicate, wow, she's helped so many more colleagues who owe her a debt of gratitude. And you can check for previous years. The past 5 election cycles are available. Not everybody has been doing it for 5 election cycles, but that's the default range that's offered. So you might then go back and say, well, what about last year or the last election cycle? The 2022 election cycle, as it happens, was much more active for Gerry Connolly, and you have the chance to take a look at that. Anyway, the point is that the numbers on outgoing funds weigh very heavily in AOC's favor. So, to the extent that that translates into contributions to colleagues, which they remember and appreciate, and to colleagues who are who won their elections. Sometimes, of course, these are to challengers who are running for anything, open seats, primary challengers in some cases, to incumbent Democrats, whatever. But they have to end up in Congress and be a member of the Democratic caucus in order to count, really, in all of this. So I guess this ties up all of our loose ends, right? Okay, so one of the things you may have heard yesterday was that there was a vote and that AOC did not win that vote, that Gerry Connolly won that vote for ranking member of the House Government Oversight Committee, right? Well, what you were reading about was the vote of the House Democratic Caucus Steering and Policy Committee, not the final word, in fact, on all of this, in case you were really nervous about that or dejected about having read that. That's the House Democratic Caucus. That's the gathering, the formal body to which all members, Democratic members of the House belong, has a steering and policy committee that helps make decisions like this, guidelines, really, recommendations for committee assignments, essentially, is what it comes down to. Who's going to be on what committee? People request certain committees. There's not room enough all the time for everyone to get what they want. And then, of course, they make recommendations for who ought to be the chair or ranking member, as the case may be, from the Democratic caucus on each of these committees. So, like I said, it's kind of a recommendation, actually. Now, they're most often taken. The Steering and Policy Committee, very heavily dominated by the House Democratic Caucus's leadership, Hakeem Jeffries in this case, but still with us in the House and still exerting influence, Nancy Pelosi. And so, the establishment leadership is going to have a lot to say in who's on the Steering and Policy Committee, and therefore who the Steering and Policy Committee might recommend take jobs like the ranking membership on the House Oversight Committee. Well, they voted for Gerry Connolly, and it's not terribly surprising. Connolly has a lot of seniority, and seniority is something that's important in all of this, and some people think that it ought not to be, but seniority has an interesting background. We've discussed it on the show before as well. Maybe we'll get back around to that one. But anyway, they made the recommendation that Connolly be approved by the caucus. And today the caucus in full will meet and decide either to ratify all of the recommendations made by the House, by the caucus Steering and Policy Committee, or in certain cases to weigh those decisions and decide whether or not they want to approve them. And they have that opportunity with this race and any other, I guess, in which a member says, actually, I'd like to hold a separate vote on that. They can handle things all sorts of different ways. They can offer an en bloc resolution saying that we adopt all of the recommendations made by the Steering and Policy Committee. They can say, let's vote through them one by one. They can say, all but this one here, this one we want a separate vote on, and it's up to the members to kind of work out in the caucus how they want to vote on it. It sounds like AOC anticipates asking for a separate vote on the issue of the ranking membership of the Government Oversight Committee because she thinks she can reverse the outcome of the Steering and Policy Committee's result. And she may very well be able to. It was relatively close. It wasn't an overwhelming endorsement for Connolly. It was also reported a couple of days ago that AOC is pretty sure that she has the support of a majority and possibly a vast majority of the Democratic members, the current Democratic members of the Government Oversight Committee. So that will be interesting. And now the question is, can she win the support of the majority of the entire caucus? So there is another vote going on. You may have noticed her tweeting/posting yesterday that she was asking for, believe it or not, if you're interested in doing such a thing, prayers or positivity, depending on how you like to express yourself, for things that were going on yesterday, that was today in her tweet, and tomorrow, which is now today. Why both days? And the answer is because on one day there was the Steering and Policy Committee recommendation vote, and on the other day, that's now today, the vote of the full caucus. So, how's it going? Well, like I said, a great guide to the prediction is the money, and the easiest 10-second test for it is, well, let's look at the last election cycle and see how much was spent. Okay, now, there's a finer level of this, right? Okay, so as we said, Connolly had spent $178,000, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, $542,000. Looking at that more closely, there is another metric available, and that metric is if you scroll down a little bit here, is it? Where let's see, where do they put this thing? There's a button for show me how many candidate recipients there were. Okay, I think what you have to do here is you click on the name of the PAC, Commonwealth PAC for Connolly, brings you to a profile page of the PAC, and then there is they give you different views of how the money is divided. There, you can look at the party split by election cycle. Now, this is a leadership PAC. It's going to be 100% expenditures for Democrats, 0% for Republicans. Usually. You hope so. A better or more interesting metric would be spending by election cycle, of course. And then, let's see, where is that? There is a button here that what we're really looking for is the candidate recipients, and I forget where there it is, right up at the top. Okay, there's a summary, candidate recipients, donors. You can see who's giving money to that PAC. That's important sometimes. Expenditures and PAC and party contributions. Candidate recipients is what you're looking for, and you find that of the, what did we say, for $174,000 spent by Connolly in the election cycle, how much of it actually went to candidates? And the answer to that is, well, less. $60,500 was actually spent on candidates. What happens to the rest of the money? Well, like I said, sometimes that's travel expenses for when they're running around the country campaigning for people. Sometimes it's catering expenses for a fundraiser for the leadership PAC. Sometimes it's other things. AOC, my recollection is, tends to spend leadership PAC money on all sorts of things, which is really interesting and actually could be a very wise strategy decision. Although if you're really, if you're running for leadership, I guess you want to concentrate on members of the House. And that's the most straightforward use of it. But she also has given a lot of leadership PAC money to people running for other offices. But it's Democratic Party building. She gave a considerable amount of money to people running for New York State office in many places, or other states, but also for state office, as opposed to helping just House colleagues. She has boosted Senate campaigns with it. She has paid for party building activities inside of her district or in the greater New York area or other places, other urban areas where her allies are the local elected officials. So a lot of money getting spent on party building, but not necessarily all on helping House colleagues. Similarly, Gerry Connolly has other expenses as well, but $174,000 spent, $60,000 of which went to people actually running for Congress. Did they make it? Most often, yes. Did they make it always? No, not always. So what about AOC's Courage to Change PAC? We click on that, look at candidate recipients. Remember, she had raised some, what did we say, $542,000 or spent $542,000. Of that $542,000, here's where the problem begins to arise. How much spent on House candidates, colleagues, potential colleagues, prospective colleagues? $80,000. Wow, okay, but that's a very big difference, right? We're talking about almost $500,000 that went elsewhere. You might want to know what, and you can click on the expenditures button here, and they're separated at first by category, but $303,000, 61% of the PAC leadership expenditures in the 2024 election cycle for AOC on media. What exactly? Well, you'd have to look at the report to figure out exactly who was getting that money and why, but you get some sense of what that might be, and you know how AOC is. She also made $91,000 in contributions to other campaign committees, but only $80,000 of it count as candidate recipients for whatever reasons, but you could be paying expenses elsewhere for other campaign-related expenses, but didn't go to the campaign fund. $65,000 in administrative costs, $20,000 in campaign expenses, $8,000, almost $9,000 in strategy and research, $6,000 in fundraising. There's a lot of expenditures that go in on this, but the race is closer than it looked.
Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time, just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Nat Roots Radio. I realize we've spent an awful lot of time on this, and this will all be over today, and so, in a sense, useless. But I think good background information, it helps you understand, in the end, why is the Democratic Party leadership the way it is? Why is it comprised of the people of whom it is comprised? Did I get that syntax right? And how do you change that if that's something you wanted to do? One of the things that really had impressed me most about AOC has been that she came in as something of a firebrand, and people kind of thought, oh my gosh, we're not going to be able to contain this one, and she's just going to be one of those problematic members who will be a flash in the pan and come and go. Of course, a lot of a lot of centrist leaders were upset that she had unseated a Democratic incumbent who was himself something of a centrist leader. I think we've been over that story, though. But she has shown a tremendous ability to understand how politics is actually played by those centrists, and has, to some extent, agreed to play that game. I was impressed with the idea that she understood that, one, the policy decisions ultimately made by House Democratic Caucus members are driven by leadership, and that the way to, redirect those policy preferences is to act from leadership and lead other members to this conclusion. How do you get to be a leader? Well, that's kind of complicated, but actually a shorthand hack for it is lead. Be good to your colleagues. Help them win election in ways that they will remember and that they can repay you with when you decide you would like to be a leader. And she understood right away that it's not a magical thing, or it's not something you have to be necessary. It helps to be something of an insider, of course, but you could make yourself something of an inside player by raising money. It's a difficult thing to do very often for progressive members in particular, and that has to do sometimes with demographics. The most progressive members don't always come from the most affluent donor-based districts. That's where you're chiefly going to raise your money as an incoming freshman, certainly, when you have usually very little national reach. And so the more affluent your district, if you're Nancy Pelosi, San Francisco, yes. If you are campaigning out in the Bronx, not so much, right? But if you do find a way to generate national attention and have a national reach, and you convert that into a leadership pack that can raise and spend a tremendous amount of money, then you can climb the leadership ladder. And very often, people from, the lower income districts can't raise that money and don't rise in the ranks, with one exception, that being the now hated, this is the wrinkle I have to throw in, the now widely hated seniority system. And people frown about that one. And for instance, right now, Gerry Connolly is making a seniority-based argument, or rather other proxies for Gerry Connolly, people who support him in his bid, are telling the newspaper reporters covering the race that this, should AOC win, it would be, as they say, the end of seniority, the end of the seniority system, not realizing that most rank and file Democrats say, oh, boo-hoo, terrific, I can't wait for the end of the seniority system. Why? Because, well, it plays right into one of the chief complaints of about the Democratic leadership these days, which is that they are septuagenarian, octogenarian. They're very old. They've been around for a long time. That's nice. Experience. It's good. But it does tend to give the party that reputation of, well, they've been around forever. It's kind of ossified. They're not real connected with the rank and file. Certainly we hope to activate young voters. We keep reading over and over again that Donald Trump won because he was able to activate young, disaffected men in particular. And, now is the time we should be looking toward the youth in our side of the aisle, and instead we're presenting them with 70 and 80-year-old very unexciting members of Congress who would then be defeating for leadership roles the more exciting and younger members, right? So that's problematic. I'll say one or two things in favor of the seniority system, which the most important of which is historical, that the seniority system was, at least, for some time, the only race-blind metric, and the first race-blind metric, and the only one, I guess, that eventually allowed minority members, black members in particular, to ascend the leadership ladder in a still then mostly white and not quite entirely open Democratic caucus way back when. And of course, right up into modern times. But when, in the olden days, when they could just elbow and wink at each other, well, you don't want one of them to be in the leadership. Well, gosh, that's a huge problem. Well, it's not that. It's that, of course, you see, we're voting for them because they have seniority, these old white gentlemen. And the Congressional Black Caucus quickly came to realize, well, at least there is, or maybe they even pushed for, because, way back when it was just sort of good old boys network that decided who was going to be in the leadership and who was going to get plum committee assignments. And they said, well, why not back the idea of purely basing it on seniority? Because black members can amass seniority. Even if they can't amass campaign cash, they can amass seniority by serving their district and being popular and being reelected over and over again. And eventually then it will then fall to the Democratic caucus to, if they want to continue to exclude black members and other minority members from the leadership, they're going to have to do it in the face of, well, we said it was all about seniority and you're the most senior, but other reasons. Will they have the guts, the chutzpah, the balls, as they said, because it was mostly men then, to stand up and say, you're the most senior, but I don't know, this whiter guy, gosh, he seems fresh, and what a nice approach to, all right. So, in other words, it was the seniority system that gave minority members in the Democratic caucus the chance to finally achieve leadership positions, and it's extremely important in that respect. And the Congressional Black Caucus in particular is very protective of its members who have amassed that seniority, and therefore protective of the seniority system in general. Back in 2006, after wresting back control of the House after however many years it was, 14 years out, following the Gingrich Republican Revolution, right? And they finally took back majority status in the House, and they needed to select new committee chairs. There was, in fact, a push for, we just won this election. We should capitalize on it. We want to put the people who are at the forefront in leadership positions. But there was a minute of, well, wait a second now. This is finally, there's a number of black Democrats who have put in their time and who have 10, 12, 15, 20 years of seniority here and are finally in a position on the basis of seniority to assume leadership positions. And now the white members and progressive members of the Democratic caucus are saying, well, we want to get rid of the old ossified seniority system. And all of a sudden, just as black members were going to ascend in significant numbers to leadership positions on the committees, I don't think so. And they did, in fact, convince people, actually that would be relatively unfair. And so there was an even split there, but they were very protective for good reason of the seniority system. And though it may be the case that it's come to outlive its usefulness, and we've seen a number of minority members rise to leadership and perform wonderfully, and now it's not as much of an issue, let's say. But I don't know that we can say, we can take like the broader analog to it. Can we say, as the Supreme Court once did, well, we're post-racial now, everything's fine. One guy got elected, so there's no more racism. So, I don't know, I guess I'd be wary of that. So, before we trash the seniority system entirely, you should remember that and let it temper your thinking. Everybody I've told that has said, all right, that's a point. I'll be aware of that. But, we really got to come up with some different system. Well, money is a different system. And by the way, it tracks pretty closely with seniority. One of the things that makes Gerry Connolly a formidable candidate, although he didn't raise nearly as much or spend nearly as much from his leadership PAC in the last election cycle, when you break it down to votes that will be accessible in the caucus because he helped those members with their elections, it's actually a lot closer, for one thing. And for another, he's been doing it for longer. That's where seniority sometimes tracks with the money. You've just been raising and giving out money for longer than the other people. Now, as it happens, over the past 5 election cycles, AOC has only been around for and had a leadership pack for the last 3 election cycles. Connolly has been working this for 5 or more election cycles. I don't know if Open Secrets makes it easy to see older, or previous election cycles with a different button, but, it offers you 5. Or is it 6? Yeah, 2024, 22, 2018, 16. Okay. Now if you scroll, okay, well, there you go. You can scroll all the way back and see that it didn't make sense that they would only offer you that many. But I don't know. For some reason, it wasn't scrolling last night. But that goes back to the 2000 election cycle for Gerry Connolly. Way back then, he wasn't raising a tremendous amount of money, but he did manage to... raise and then spend. It didn't make any contributions in the 2000 cycle. Okay, great. Well, I don't know. At any rate, the point is that he's been doing it for longer. I guess I could go back to, say, 2010 and see what it says about that. So now Connolly was around, but he wasn't raising and spending any money on behalf of candidates at that point. Let's say 2014, he... raised and spent $30,000 for fellow candidates. Back then, some successful, some not successful. The point is, he's been doing it for longer. So even though AOC raised a tremendous amount of money and spent a tremendous amount of money in a short period of time, could he overcome that cash advantage with a longevity advantage? And he's been giving away campaign money since, let's say 2014, 2012. Did he do any? Yeah, 2012. What about 2010? No, I guess 2012 was about when he started with the leadership pack. And some members wait until they're more senior and are thinking of moving into leadership, and some people do it right away, like AOC. So the question then is, a quick look at it is the money. But the money raised is deceptive because sometimes they don't move it out. It only helps if you move it out of the pack and into other people's hands. Expenditures doesn't quite capture it because AOC spent $800,000, but only $80,000 of it made it into the hands of candidates directly. And that's the closest proxy for votes. So it's a little closer than you think. Then she's only been doing it for 3 election cycles. Connolly's been doing it for whatever it is, 10 election cycles. Does it add up? And if you really want to get granular and you really want to look at this, you start to look at, okay, well, who did he give the money to? Are they members of the Democratic caucus today? In some cases, Gerry Connolly has given tremendous amount of money to members who were quite successful but have since retired or been defeated and aren't there in the Democratic caucus to cast votes today. So that's what it comes down to. And then, of course, there's the possibility that, despite the fact that you gave me money, I just prefer the other person for one reason or another, or someone's twisting my arm, or whatever it is. Doesn't necessarily directly translate into votes, but it's a pretty close proxy. But that's an involved process. You got to look at everybody who got money over the years, write it all down. Of course, you could have given money to a single candidate several times over many election cycles, but they only have the one vote in the caucus, so there's a little complicating factor there. Yes, this one gave money to 40 candidates who made it into the House and will be members of the Democratic caucus and can therefore vote on that question today. And they gave money to an additional 30 candidates in the previous election cycle, but 10 of them were the same. So it's not the case that they have 70 votes, prospective votes, but rather, I forget what the numbers were that I said. Okay, but so 60 or 50 of them are in fact individuals who have a vote to cast. And then there will be some members who got cash from both Connolly and AOC. And is it then a question of who gave more? Well, in some cases, yes. One of the things Gerry Connolly does, boy, we are talking about this for a long time, but it's a good lesson. One of the things Connolly does is spread around money in smaller increments. A lot of the contributions that he makes to people were in $2,000 range, $1,000, $4,000. Very few got $5,000 or even $10,000. I didn't see any $10,000 contributions. AOC tends to go all in for the people that she supports, which has this effect. If she's spending $80,000 and he's spending $60,000, but he's spending $60,000 on 50 candidates, 40 of whom make it to Congress, and she's spending money on 30 candidates, 20 of whom make it to Congress, what happens? Well, there may be more votes available to him, despite the fact that she outraised and outspent him. So when I say you look at the money spent from the leadership PAC as a quick and dirty measure, it is quick and dirty. It really depends on the PAC administrator doing the usual thing with it. If something unusual is done with it, media expenditures rather than direct candidate expenditures, for instance, then you got to look year over year at who got money. Did they make it? Are they here to cast a vote? And if so, did they also get money from the other person? And if so, how much? A $1,000 contribution, is it outweighed by a $5,000 contribution? Maybe, and there's good reason to think that it might be, but it often comes down to something else. So the impression that the person made in agreeing to contribute, the other forms of help that they might have offered. There's a lot of intangibles involved here. But like I said, quick and dirty, look at the expenditures. Less quick, less dirty, look at the candidate recipients and who's still there. More troublesome still, but probably more revealing, how much money was given, over how much time, and for how long, and to how many members. And so you really, if you're good at spreadsheets, you can sort through this thing. But then even in the end, what you end up with is, well, this one should be able to count on the backing of these 100 members, and this one should be able to count on the backing of these 80 members. What about the rest of them, to whom nobody gave any money? For them, is it an ideological contest? Sometimes. Is it a party-building preference contest? More often, yeah. So can that come down to vibes? Yeah, it can. And it depends what kind of vibes you prefer. Do you prefer the staid, seniority-based vibes of Gerry Connolly, despite the fact that, well, he says he'll be up to the job, but he has got cancer to battle here. That's going to take up some amount of his time. AOC, well, she doesn't. She's younger, more energetic, yes, but might her eyes be cast elsewhere for various reasons? Is the leadership of the committee her top priority? There's no reason to believe, based on the time she's spent and the things she's done in the House, that it would be in the same way that it has been for Connolly, because Connolly has kind of always had his eye on leading that committee, whereas AOC has broader interests. But on the other hand, every time she's been handed a different task, I've seen her adapt to it quite well. And she's refocused herself a number of times and in productive ways. I have no doubt that if she committed to taking on the work of this committee, that she would do exactly that. But will other members feel that way? Also, by the way, one other weird complicating factor. If you look way back in the history of her expenditures to candidates, the entries for certain colleagues from the early days of her leadership PAC, so I guess we're talking about the 2020 campaign cycle, there are some odd entries. They are listed as having received disbursements from Courage to Change PAC, but the dollar amount is zero. What does that indicate? This is a story I have heard about, and I guess this is what matches up here. The people who got contributions from Courage to Change PAC, who got frightened into returning AOC's contribution because, oh my God, she's from the squad, and that's bad, and someone might have said something about how much money should be allocated for police departments. I can't have this money in my account. Everyone will be so furious that $5,000 of my $1 million worth of campaign funds came from another Democrat who they heard said something. They returned these contributions. There's 3 or 4 of them. But that explains the $0 contribution, but yet the listing on having received an expenditure from Courage to Change PAC. Not so much courage in there. But I guess if to the extent that those people are still members of the House Democratic Caucus, I assume though they had been given help by AOC, might nonetheless be inclined to vote for Gerry Connolly if they were so scared. Or maybe they've changed their mind, as many as of us have, about AOC and her efficacy inside the Democratic Caucus, and would be willing to accept that money now. Anyway, so that vote, I don't know when it even takes place. We should be looking it up. They might be taking place now as we speak. If it hasn't yet, and you've been encouraged to say, well, is this something you could call your member of Congress about and express a preference? If your member of Congress is a Democrat, yes. Republican members, in this case, of course, won't be voting in the Democratic caucus for on this question or any other. But if you have a Democratic member of Congress, you might consider giving them a call and talking to their office about that. As I saw LOL GOP point out, it will freak them out a little bit. It does sometimes freak members of Congress and staff out that members of the public pay attention to this kind of inside baseball. Sometimes it works to move them off the dime, sometimes not. If they aren't among the members who have gotten money from either Connolly or AOC and are trying to decide what to do, it may move them. It may move them, the wrong direction, but it may move them in the right direction too. So, okay, I think I've told you enough about this, but it is an interesting topic. I like to get into it on a granular level. I had said that AOC was swamping Connolly in terms of the money raised and spent from the leadership PACs, and that's true. But again, as we got into the specifics of it, it looks like it's a lot closer, in fact. And Connolly appears to have an edge in terms of the number of members of the caucus who will be able to claim that he helped them directly versus AOC. But again, the quality and depth of that commitment in that help is somewhat questionable, and it will depend on how members feel about, well, in 2014 he gave me $1,000. Is that enough to change my mind now? So, although the money, like I said, was quick and dirty, and it should be pointed out that AOC's leadership PAC has only been in operation for 3 election cycles, many more election cycles in operation for Connolly, but of the last 5 or 6 election cycles, AOC, though having participated in only 3 of them, still outraised and outspent directly to candidates, outspent Connolly by about 25%. The only issue is that was, X number of $5,000 contributions versus Y number of $1,000 contributions. And so it looks to me like AOC has made direct contributions to, we're going to guess, with overlap and repeat contributions, something in the neighborhood of 50 members of Congress who are still there and can cast votes. Connolly, I would guess, probably closer to 80 to 100 members who are still there. So that's the question. And that's the difference. And that's why looking at the money alone is so quick and dirty. But usually the bulk of that money ends up going to candidates and AOC's expenditures for candidates for other offices besides the House, and expenditures on media, which, some members, some of the more conservative and staid and traditional members will say, look at all the money she's wasting on media. That's crazy. But that's what enables her to raise and spend the rest of that money. Media is where it's at, and media is the future for Democratic campaigning if they can get the hang of it, because we've just seen media, non-traditional use of media, pull the rug out from underneath the Democratic Party once again and return Donald Trump to power. So, there's something to be said for it. Whether they're willing to admit it or not is the next question. Okay, that brings us almost to the end of the second segment, which is an amazing overuse of time for this stupid race, which will probably be over really soon. But we hope for good results. I think rank-and-file progressive Democrats really, really, really want to see AOC win this thing. There's a pretty substantial chance, though, that she won't, but I don't think she would be pressing ahead the way she's doing if she didn't think there was a reasonable shot at convincing a majority of the Democratic caucus, despite the fact that, yes, Nancy Pelosi has, in fact, been campaigning against her for this. Nancy Pelosi never really came around to the pro-AOC position here, though I'm sure her impression of her work has changed. She's got a longer and a more, deeper relationship probably with Gerry Connolly than with her, and just simply prefers him, and can point to some other metrics to say, yeah, it's his turn. He's done the work. The committee. I guess the other thing is, how do you react to the way that Comer, the chair, has changed the nature of the committee's work? One more thing I guess I'll add before we ring out for this segment is that the House Government and Oversight Committee traditionally, and certainly under Democratic leadership, but traditionally has been more about, are the various departments doing their jobs? Should we be reading, let's read over the Inspector General reports from each of the departments. Where are their problems? Where can efficiencies be realized? And of course, what can we do to help oversee not only the performance of the government, but the performance of and the problems outlined by government employees? What about whistleblower reports, IG reports? What can we be doing to increase the efficiency of the federal workforce? That's the way Democrats have approached the committee's work. Republicans have instead looked at it as a investigative committee, and the nature of that, it requires a different sort of worker. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I'm just taking a quick look over blue sky to see whether there was any indication of an ongoing vote or whether the caucus was meeting. No indication yet that anything has happened, but I only got a chance to search one or two terms here. But maybe if you've heard differently, let me know. But AOC herself was out there reminding everybody, although the headlines were all about the Steering and Policy Committee vote, hey, it isn't over. Don't give up just yet. Stay positive. She's got high hopes that she can change the direction on this thing. And gosh, we'll see. All right, it's probably time for us to turn to some other topics at this point. But I did want to finish up that thought in case it kind of, faded into the background as we were heading to break. The nature of the committee's work has changed a great deal. It is now an investigative committee chiefly, and a crusading investigative committee chiefly. And you really need somebody who is going to be able to stand up to that, stand up to Comer, and to know and understand the rules of the committee, which I guess you might think, Connolly has been on it for that much longer. Sometimes they know the rules, sometimes, inside out, and sometimes they don't. And I don't know whether AOC does or not, but I get the sense that she's pretty well versed in these things. But it's not so much that as it is the willingness to stand on your feet and try and work to find a way to frustrate the purpose of Republicans Gone Wild. when they are in the heat of the moment. Can you utilize the rules to highlight the fact that the Republican leadership is running roughshod over those rules? Do you lose your cool when that happens? Or do you fall back into, he has me there on procedure, I'm going to have to shut up now kind of stuff? It just, I think, demands a different lineup these days, does the Oversight Committee. And it doesn't make as much sense necessarily to have the Democratic roster there be always so heavily populated with Maryland, D.C., Virginia area members. It makes good sense for them constituent service-wise, but it might not be, the best lineup for what the committee is actually being used for these days. Okay, and with that, back to Pocket so that I can tell you some other stories about what's going on, and I've put ourselves behind the eight ball on a number of these things. All right, let's see. To catch up, one of the things that my brother Mark shared with me recently, something that I think we've discussed on the show already, but now there's been further developments. We already, I think, have in the past told the story of Alexander Smirnov, who, is back in the news. We'll give you the headline. Former FBI informant, that's Smirnov, pleads guilty to lying about phony bribery scheme involving the Bidens. This is where we are now. He's at the pleading stage, having pled guilty to the charges brought against him for making up, basically, the Burisma story. This is the person who was chiefly behind planting with Trump's operatives the story they were looking for out of the Ukraine blackmail, going all the way back to his first impeachment when he was withholding military aid to Ukraine unless they do us a favor, right? Remember he calling the President Zelensky and saying, we need you to, we're going to send you military aid, but we need you to do me a favor first. Find me dirt on the Biden family. Why did he think there was dirt on the Biden family? Well, a number of reasons, but all illegitimate, as it turns out, including that Alexander Smirnov and others were planting stories. Well, do you want there to be dirt on the Biden family? You need there to be dirt on the Biden family. Who cares if it exists or not? But here's the germ of the idea here. Hunter Biden is on the board of Burisma. Why should that be happening? That's a legitimate question. Well, if we don't really know, could we make up a story that makes it look like there's corruption happening? Yes. Who took on that work? Alexander Smirnov. And now, can you get away with that? Well, you can for a while, but then eventually you have to come to court and plead guilty. A former FBI informant pleaded guilty, in fact, on Monday to lying about a phony bribery scheme involving President Joe Biden and his son Hunter that became somehow central to the Republican impeachment inquiry in Congress. And we don't here mean the impeachment of the Republican Donald Trump the first time around, but rather the efforts by Republicans in Congress to come up with something that they could use to impeach Joe Biden. Didn't work, but it was all based on lies. And now the guy who lied is in trouble and has admitted it. Alexander Smirnov entered his plea to a felony charge in connection with the bogus story, along with tax evasion charges stemming from a separate indictment accusing him of concealing millions of dollars of income. So when we say, as my brother Mark reminded me today, that every Republican accusation is a confession, we really mean it. On every front, right? Every Republican accusation is a confession. They're lying. Someone is corrupt. Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, et cetera, et cetera. Well, no, actually, it's a confession that you are making this stuff up. And here you are, years later, confessing that, in fact, you made this stuff up. But in addition to all of that, Hunter Biden may not have done all that stupid Burisma stuff, but he certainly is guilty of tax evasion and lying to public officials, whether it's on the gun purchase form or to the FBI or whatever. Oh, am I also guilty of now, A, lying to the FBI about his involvement in Burisma, but P.S., yeah, at least Hunter Biden, he's still guilty of tax evasion. Oh, I am too? Huh. How odd is that? An attorney for Smirnov, 44, that's Smirnov, not the attorney. I don't know how old the attorney is. Declined to comment after the hearing in Los Angeles federal court. Prosecutors in the defense have agreed to recommend a sentence of between 4 to 6 years in prison when he's sentenced next month. Smirnov will get credit for the time he has served since his February arrest on charges that he told his FBI handler that executives from the Ukrainian energy company Burisma had paid President Biden and Hunter Biden $5 million each around 2015. Oh, was that made up? Yeah, well, I guess I'm going to jail then. And then I guess now you have to start wondering whether or not Donald Trump pardons this guy or not. I don't know whether he has any interest in doing it. I don't know if it gains him anything, but it might just anger Democrats, and that might be enough for him to want to do it. So there you go. There's more. Smirnov had been an informant for more than a decade when he made the explosive allegations about the Bidens. After expressing bias about Joe Biden as a presidential candidate, prosecutors said. But Smirnov had only routine business dealings with Burisma starting in 2017, according to court documents. An FBI field office investigated the allegations and recommended the case be closed in August 2020, according to charging documents. No evidence has emerged that Joe Biden acted corruptly or accepted bribes as president or in his previous office as vice president. And while Smirnov's identity wasn't publicly known before the indictment, his claims played a major part in the Republican effort in Congress to investigate the president and his family and helped spark a House impeachment inquiry into Biden. That went nowhere because there was nothing. Before Smirnov's arrest, Republicans had demanded that the FBI release the unredacted form documenting the unverified allegations, though they acknowledged they couldn't confirm if they were true. And now we have confirmation. The guy who gave them says they're not. During a September 2023 conversation with investigators, Smirnov also claimed that the Russians probably had recordings of Hunter Biden because a hotel in Ukraine's capital where he stayed was wired and under their control. Information that he said was passed along to him by 4 high-level Russian officials. But Hunter Biden had never traveled to Ukraine, according to Smirnov's indictment. Smirnov claimed to have contacts with Russian intelligence-affiliated officials and told authorities after his arrest this year that officials associated with Russian intelligence were involved in passing a story about Hunter Biden. And I guess Smirnov heard it, passed it on, and he was a dupe and an idiot. Or just, a liar in service of Donald Trump. The case against Smirnov was brought by special counsel David Weiss, who also prosecuted Hunter Biden on gun and tax charges. Hunter Biden was supposed to be sentenced this month after being convicted at a trial in the gun case and pleading guilty to federal charges in the tax case, but he was pardoned this month by his father, who said he believed that raw politics has infected this process and it led to a miscarriage of justice. And this guy's confession makes it real. What do you know? He was, in fact, the target of a political operation, and the guy has confessed as much. Okay, so, we're up to speed on that, but I wanted you to know where we were in the process of adjudicating this thing. Whether or not it all gets thrown out later on by Donald Trump, we have yet to find out. Let's see. An interesting development in New York, where Judge Juan Merchan has issued a ruling about that much ballyhooed presidential immunity that Donald Trump now claims, his lawyers claim, should excuse him from facing any further proceedings in his hush money case, the Stormy Daniels hush money case in which he was convicted on 34 counts. Merchan rules that Trump does not have presidential immunity protections in this conviction. Kara Scannell, Jeremy Herb, and Lauren Duval report for CNN, but it's a little complex. It's a little hair splitting going on in the case, as is usually the case in cases like this. Donald Trump's felony conviction in the New York hush money case should not be tossed out anyway, because of the Supreme Court's ruling on presidential immunity. Judge Merchan ruled on Monday. Merchan's decision rejected one of several avenues that Trump's lawyers have taken to try to dismiss Trump's May guilty verdict on 34 counts of falsifying business records. The judge did not, however, rule on a motion from Trump's attorneys to dismiss the conviction because Trump has now been elected president. In other words, Post-presidential immunity hasn't helped him. Well, what about future presidential immunity? No ruling on that as yet. Instead, his 41-page decision focused on the question of presidential immunity as it stood prior to his election. Merchan, I've added that part, but they just say focused on the question of presidential immunity. How so? Merchan wrote, the Supreme Court's ruling that Trump should receive broad immunity for official acts during his time in office did not mean that the conviction should be dismissed because the evidence presented by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office was not related to Trump's official conduct as president. Remember, that was the supposed loophole in all of this. Yeah, you can have presidential immunity, but only with respect to official acts. How do you define them? Well, we'll leave them up to you. What does Judge Merchan say? Judge Merchan says, these payments to the porn actress to cover up her sexual affair, I don't know, it wasn't really an ongoing affair, but her sexual liaison with Donald Trump, not really all that official an act. Besides which, it all took place well before he was president, well before he was even a candidate for president. How could it be? Well, the cover-up happened while he was a candidate for president, and then continued into when he was president. Still, in all, how could you consider hush money payments for old sexual encounters to be an official act? It might be something nobody cares about, but it certainly isn't an official act. The evidence contested by Trump's lawyers, the judges wrote, related entirely to unofficial conduct and should receive no immunity protections. Of course, he's just a trial-level judge. There's certainly room for appeal. There shouldn't be. He shouldn't bother with it, and it all, is rendered moot later on anyway by the fact that they're not going to do anything about the convictions, at least for the time being, while he's about to assume the presidency. This court concludes that if error occurred regarding the introduction of the challenged evidence, such error was harmless in light of the overwhelming evidence of guilt, Merchan wrote. They were challenging the admission of some specific piece of evidence, but he said, doesn't matter. The overall evidence was such that conviction was warranted. Even if this court did find that the disputed evidence constitutes official acts under the auspices of the Trump decision from the Supreme Court, which it does not, defendant's motion is still denied as introduction of the disputed evidence constitutes harmless error and no mode of proceedings error has taken place. Trump transition spokesperson Stephen Chung, which of course should still be the prison doors closing behind him eventually, said in a statement that Merchan's decision, quote, is a direct violation of the Supreme Court's decision on immunity and other long-standing jurisprudence. It is not, but that is what they're saying anyway. The Trump lawyers are likely to appeal Merchan's decision, one of several potential motions for dismissal that could leave the case tied up for months or even years, as is their usual practice. Merchan still has to rule on Trump's argument that his status as president, when he returns to the presidency, was a legal impediment to further criminal proceedings and that the case should be dismissed as a result. Trump has yet to be sentenced following his May conviction. Prosecutors have already agreed the president-elect would not be sentenced while he's in office, but the district attorney's office has argued in legal filings that the felony conviction should still stand. Prosecutors wrote that while the sentence could be delayed or modified, dismissing a jury's conviction altogether would be an unwarranted, extreme remedy. You see the difference there? Trump was convicted in May of 34 counts of falsifying business records. You know all about it and why. Trump was initially scheduled to be sentenced in July. It was postponed twice as a result of the Supreme Court's presidential immunity ruling, which eventually Merchan decided had nothing to do with at least the evidence, or the evidentiary rulings anyway, pushing a sentencing date back until after the election, of course. Then Trump's lawyers argued that his conviction should be dismissed on the basis of the Supreme Court's decision because prosecutors relied on evidence from Trump's official conduct in the White House. Merchan said, no, that wasn't official conduct, but even if it was, which it isn't, it still would be a harmless error. Merchan rejected that claim in his decision, writing that the evidence contested was not tied to Trump's official acts as president. In his decision, he walked through several pieces of testimony that Trump's lawyers claimed should not have been heard at trial because of the immunity decision, including from White House aides Hope Hicks and Madeleine Westerhout, as well as Cohen, and I guess Michael Cohen, who was mentioned in the part we skipped over. Merchan wrote that it was logical and reasonable to conclude that if the act of falsifying records to cover up the payments so that the public would not be made aware of is a decidedly unofficial act, so too should the communications to further that same cover-up be unofficial. The fact that they were White House people he was talking to about covering things up doesn't mean it's an official act. You know, you gotta kind of agree with that, don't you? Jeez. Merchan disclosed in a letter to the attorneys on Monday that Trump's defense team alleged juror misconduct as well earlier this month, but that Trump's team had not filed a motion to dismiss the conviction based on that. In other words, they're throwing everything that they've got at it. Well, dismiss the convictions because the evidence admitted was improper. No. Not true. Well, then dismiss the conviction because I'm about to become president. Well, that's not a basis for dismissing a conviction. It's a basis for not sentencing you or incarcerating you, but not throwing out the conviction. Okay, well then throw out the conviction based on juror misconduct. All right, what is the juror misconduct? I don't know yet. I'll tell you later. Well, we'll wait and see then, because we're open and fair in this process. Bending over backwards to let you make any stupid appeal you want and drag the process out for years and years. Oh, well. Let's see. Right. So the judge wrote that Trump's lawyers would need to file a proper motion if they want him to act on it, in terms of the alleged juror misconduct, which we can't name. Details of the allegations could come out in filings Merchan ordered the attorneys to release about the purported issue, with redactions. Allegation of juror misconduct should be thoroughly investigated. However, this court is prohibited from deciding such claims on the basis of mere hearsay and conjecture. Can't just say there was stuff and then, not prove it. The court cannot allow the public filing of unsworn and admittedly contested statements. To do so would threaten the safety of the jurors and violate the agreed-upon order regulating disclosure of juror information. So there you are on that front. Important to, parse the issues and split the hairs so that you know what's going on. All right. Let's see. What other news do we need to bring you up to date on? There's a lot. So we've been mentioning in our international tours when we talk with Greg each Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, the various countries in upheaval. And he's already mentioned the collapse of the French governing coalition. I made mention yesterday, I think, of what the hell are we talking about? Germany for? I don't know. It doesn't matter, because as it turns out, but we made mention of, I guess we were talking about the Romania situation and the various other countries in which right-wing online discourse was permeating the system. Well, as it turns out, I don't know whether it has anything to do with the whys and wherefores of this, but we have to add now that the German governing coalition has collapsed as well, and they will likewise see snap elections very soon. I think we were, I can't remember exactly what we were talking about offhand and why the German issue, it came up, and then I remember seeing this news right after the show and saying, I wish we had known, because we were just talking, we made mention of Germany. It would have been important to add that to the conversation. Those of you with better memories than I have can piece that together. All right. I also, is there any other hard news things that we have to catch up on? Yes. Oh, okay. This is maybe the most amazing thing of all. You've probably been wondering, why haven't you been talking about this? There was we're under the cloud of a school shooting. It actually, I don't think, gets us to mass shooting, by definition, but, because it took place in a school, warranted our attention. And of course, because it happened in a Christian school, I just want to note for the record that once again, the somewhat ridiculous idea that, these mass school shootings are only happening in public school because there's something wrong with public schools, as people as idiotic as Ted Cruz, for instance, have suggested in the past. These school shootings are happening because we've banished God from the town square, i.e. also public schools. Of course, they're not banishing God in religious schools, and yet the Covenant School and now Abundant Life Christian School in Madison, Wisconsin have likewise seen their own tragic school shootings. And so far, the tactic on the right, if they can't blame the doors and they can't blame, video games or mental illness or whatever, they now, their new go-to thing is, if it's a shooting at a Christian school, it must be because somebody was too woke or possibly transgender and found themselves repressed by the leadership of this Christian school and acted out violently. And there's been no indication whatsoever that anybody, as far as I can tell, had any such complaints. And they, it's just basically, as usual, access to too many guns too often and a lack of, I guess, intervention on mental health crises of various kinds. And so here we are, a rather amazing set of circumstances. The Washington Post's story on it: assailant identified in Madison, Wisconsin school shooting that killed 2, police say. And the numbers were kind of in flux yesterday, and people were worried that as many as 6 people had been killed, or the numbers were revised down, but lots of more people wounded. And the assailant in this case, once again, shot themselves at the end of all of this. So, more discrepancy over how to count the numbers. Police in Madison, Wisconsin, we're told, are searching for the motive after a student at a private Christian school killed a teenage student and a teacher and injured 6 others on campus on Monday. The shooter, identified as 15-year-old Natalie Rupnow, who went by the name Samantha, was dead when the officers arrived, and of the 6 injured, 2, both students were in critical condition with life-threatening injuries on Monday evening. So we all hope that they're able to pull through, or as they say in the gun discourse, make a full recovery, whether that is, without a limb or with a serious limp or without some crucial organ or something. They always just say, they're alive, so they've made a full recovery. So, yeah, I don't know. Well, there's more information to be had, of course, but, I'm just looking through their live updates page on all of this. And one of the more disturbing aspects of all of this, the report I saw this morning, that the call to 911 about the shooting in progress came from a 2nd grade student. I mean, look what we're having the kids do these days. A 2nd grader has to be the one to contact 911 to say there's a shooting at my school. Up until recently, you wouldn't think that 2nd graders would have the presence of mind to even know what to do, much less to be able to call and say, I actually know what category of complaint I'm going to file when I call 911. It's a shooting in progress. It's really rather amazing. But that's what we're facing these days. So I don't know. I think we'll have to wait another day before digesting any more information about the shooter in this case. But yeah, equally amazing is the fact that something like that could take place, even with our particular sensitivities about such shootings on this show, and still not make it the top headline, because we're just numb to this stuff at this point. It has happened. We weren't supposed to let it happen, but it has happened. Okay, let's see other things that I thought I might share with you today. Well, let's see. there's a bit of news on the Pete Hegseth front. First of all, he's still trying to get confirmed, which is kind of amazing. And it looks like it just might work. They might just pound all of the Republicans back into line. And despite it all, say, yes, the guy who brings, allegedly, reportedly, what have you, brings roofies with him to Republican women's conferences because going to and being a speaker at a Republican women's conference as a man, well, questionable in its own right, but then to think, well, I better bring some roofies because this is a great opportunity to drug women and rape them. What better opportunity than a bunch of women, and some of them Republican women at that, or all of them Republican women at that. Maybe they'll be, I don't know what, more receptive to my roofieing them and raping them. Apparently that's not a impediment here, but a bit of news on that front, sort of tangential news. I guess one of the guys who has been working sort of as a bodyguard, while escorting Hegseth around Capitol Hill for the meetings, turns out to have his own problems. Hegseth's guard, the New York Times tells us, left the Army after the beating of a civilian during training. Was he beating a local civilian in Iraq? No, an American civilian during some role-playing training. That guy's got issues.
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, a.k.a. Darwin_Darko, a.k.a. the most reasonable man in America, a.k.a. KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's give you a quick rundown of what we were talking about here. Pete Hegseth's guard, I don't know why he even has a guard, but he does, left the Army after the beating of a civilian during training. John Hassenbein is or Hazenbein, I don't know, Hasenbein is the guy we're talking about. Who the hell's that? Really? Well, John has apparently escorted Trump's pick for the defense secretary to meetings on Capitol Hill and has said he was unjustly prosecuted for the 2019 episode, which I guess is all of a piece with Trump's revenge schemes. And remember, Hegseth himself, I guess this is why this is also important, in addition to, hey, don't beat civilians or anybody, really. If you don't, what the hell are you doing? You're not supposed to be doing that. There are plenty of times when Army operators are supposed to be, killing people, much less, never mind beating them. I guess you could beat them along the way. It's not great. And there's rules about this stuff, but the guy he ended up beating, well, gee whiz, there's really no excuse for that. So what happens? He gets convicted of it, but he says, I'm unjustly convicted. Just as Hegseth bounced from the National Guard, we don't want that guy guarding Biden's inaugural. And we have real questions about his, true priorities and loyalties. We don't want him around. I'm unjustly done to me. And I'm going to hitch my wagon to the revenge tour that Trump is on, and I'm going to get him to, put me in place to take retribution and take revenge on people who I think wronged me, even though they were right about you. And here, a really close parallel in Hegseth's guard, which really, guard? I don't even know how that's happening. Well, here's the rundown on it. Dave Phillips and Sharon Lafreniere have reported this for the New York Times. When Pete Hegseth visited senators on Capitol Hill this month in an effort to show that he has the qualifications and judgment and roofies to lead the Defense Department, he was escorted by a security guard with a dark episode in his past, who was, looking to hitch his wagon to the guy who hitched his wagon to Donald Trump and be able to exact revenge by proxy, I guess is what's going on here. The guard, a former Army Special Forces Master Sergeant named John Jacob Hassenbein, not John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt, as many of you thought, I'm sure, but John Jacob Hassenbein, I don't know. Well, he left the military after a 2019 training event in which witnesses said he beat a civilian role player, right? They had an exercise of some kind to, I guess, teach you how to, I don't know what, deal with a prisoner, I guess. And they had just a regular role, a civilian person agreed to play the role of the detainee here, to train Hassenbein how to handle himself when dealing with such people. And guess what? He failed the training because he beat the crap out of the guy who was pretending to be a detainee. Like, can you really have that? No. Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. The answer is yes, you can, because maybe Donald Trump will pardon you for doing this. This is kind of shocking. But again, it's not Hegseth, but I don't know whether Hegseth said, I need a guard. Give me a guy who wants revenge on the Defense Department because I want revenge on the Defense Department, and so does Trump. Let's make it a threefer. Or whether he was just like, I don't know, I don't need a guard, but somebody was like, a guy wants to guard you. And, it makes you look important. You want a guard? Sure. I don't know. Maybe they discussed this. Well, the guard is Hassenbein, and like we said, he left the military in 2019 after beating a civilian role player, kicking him, punching him, and leaving him hog-tied in a pool of his own blood, which the training was don't kick, punch, and leave hog-tied in a pool of their own blood the actual detainees when you get out there and you're facing all the pressures. So what we're going to do to train you is bring in a guy who's going to pretend to be a detainee, and you will pretend not to kick, punch, beat, and hog-tie him. Oh, I kicked him, punched him, beat him, and hog-tied him. Well, you fail the training. This is unjust. No, it's pretty just. Well, the pressure, and it was a role-playing game. That's not good. Mr. Hegseth's choice, I guess he was a choice, of Mr. Hassenbein as a security escort, or even choosing to have one, and that for that matter, is the latest instance in which he has stood by soldiers accused of crimes. He has repeatedly criticized military leaders as being too woke and waging a war on warriors. But again, this was a role-playing game. In this case, Timothy Parlatore, Mr. Hegseth's lawyer, said Hassenbein was the, quote, victim of unjust treatment by a broken military justice system. And Mr. Hegseth was proud to work with him. He added, it is stories like his that demonstrate the change needed in the Department of Defense. I'm sorry, I'm getting all choked up here. But that's because I'm drowning in my own blood. The Army charged Mr. Hassenbein with aggravated assault and reckless endangerment, which sounds like it is fitting. A military jury found him guilty. What do you know? Other military guys said you're guilty of the assault charge in a court-martial in 2020, according to Army records, but the judge overseeing the case declared a mistrial. Oh, so there could be some injustice here after all. A mistrial. Why? Well, he declared a mistrial after learning that a friend of Mr. Hassenbein had been talking to a juror throughout the trial, court records show. The Army did not retry the case. So again, just to clarify here, a friend of the defendant was talking to a juror the whole time. So there has to be a mistrial. But what do you think the friend of the defendant was talking to the juror about? If he's truly a friend, he was probably saying, don't convict this guy. This is unjust. He didn't mean to punch, kick, and hog-tie this civilian role player. It just happened. It was an accident. I mean, he was probably trying to get the jury to acquit him. How did it work out? It didn't. They convicted him. But you're not supposed to talk to jurors, so mistrial. But it's not a mistrial because, well, somebody bribed the jury into convicting him. Somebody tried to, influence the jury out of convicting him, and it didn't work. But still, mistrial. But you can't really lean on that and say, this was a miscarriage of justice. Just look, there was a mistrial in my case. Holy cow. I mean, okay, so the Army did not retry the case, which I'm not certain why, but I mean, they probably have lots of work to be doing, and the guy's out of the Army now, so they let it be. This guy has real anger issues. Ahmed Al-Tamimi, the man whom Mr. Hassenbein was charged with assaulting, said in an interview, in case you're wondering about that. So a role-playing, you will handle dealing with this reluctant detainee. Now remember, don't kick him, punch him, beat him, or hog tie him and leave him in a pool of his own blood. Was it a Bosnian that he was working on? No. This is your German detainee, your Norwegian detainee. Now, the training was, I guess, supposed to be a little bit more realistic about it. So Ahmed Al-Tamimi was the detainee in question, but he wasn't a detainee. He was a civilian playing the role of someone being detained overseas, but he tends to look and sound perhaps like the detainees you're going to be trained to handle. How did you do, Mr. Hassenbein? I failed. I forgot that he was a civilian actor, and I did the things to him that I secretly was planning to do to detainees overseas anyway, despite the fact that I was going to be trained not to do that. I thought I could handle myself and not kick, punch, beat, and hogtie the actor, who was, of course, merely acting the role of a detainee. But I just couldn't help myself because I saw a brown person and I had to beat the crap out of him. Well, you fail. Well, that is unjust, says I. The guy has real anger issues. He is not a safe man, says Mr. Al-Tamimi. I don't know why they gave him this position, guarding Hegseth. Do they not do any background checks? Well, I don't know whether they do any background checks or not, but they gave him the position because Mr. Hegseth also believes that we should beat the crap out of brown people, even if they are Americans or civilians pretending only to be detainees. Because it's important that we realistically train our people. We want them to beat the crap out of the role players so that when they get overseas, they beat the crap even harder out of the real detainees, I guess is probably where Hegseth's head is. Mr. Hassenbein provided to the New York Times several official records involving his service and the case against him, along with a statement in a text message that said, and this is the narrowest possible reading of the truth in this case. Remember what happened? He was court-martialed. A friend of his tried to influence the jury, failed to influence the jury. They convicted him, but they declared a mistrial nonetheless because there was improper conduct or contact with a juror. And so he says, well, they declared a mistrial and they haven't yet retried him for the crime. He says, I have no conviction and I was honorably retired after 22 years of service. That's all you need to know. Well, I think it looks like the Times figured out what they needed to know, and they're telling us. Timothy Turner, senior counsel at the firm that represented Mr. Hassenbein in a defamation case that he later filed after the court-martial proceedings, said that Mr. Hassenbein agreed to retire rather than face another trial. That's why they didn't try him again. All right, I'll quit. Fine. That's the Army saying, fine, better use of our resources. You're out of our hair. You're not our responsibility anymore. If you stay, we're trying you. Well, I quit. Okay, that's fine. Mr. Hassenbein claimed that in the case that he was effectively forced out of the military because of false and misleading statements by employees of the independent contractor who conducted the exercise. I mean, he wanted somebody to role play as a fake detainee so that we can train Defense Department personnel not to punch you in the face. I'll take that job. Crack. Oh, they punched me in the face. You going to let this go? I mean, come on. We're going to make a complaint. All right, fine. We'll complain to the Army. Oh, the Army actually says, well, it's actually serious enough that we should do something about it. False accusation. Sure. It is unclear whether Mr. Hegseth Trump's pick for one of the most important cabinet posts, knew of Mr. Hasselbeim's record when he hired him, but some details of his case have been online for years. Michel Flournoy, the Undersecretary of Defense during Obama's first term, said having Mr. Heisenbein as a security guard is not a good look for Mr. Hegseth. She said that Hegseth had seemed to display a pattern of disregard for the military institutional efforts to hold its own accountable. And that is kind of a bad idea. Like the Department of Defense has its own military justice system and everything, and he's supposed to be in charge of seeing that it's properly administered, and he actually says, I actually think we should wreck it. Hegseth's path to confirmation has been far from smooth. You know all the stories about why. And now you know this extra little incident here. Here's a photo of Mr. Al-Tamimi having sustained numerous head injuries after an assault during this military exercise. And just imagine taking this job and being like, well, it's not fun to play a detainee, but this is a Department of Defense exercise. I am a professional here. I'm not going to be kicked, punched, hogtied, and left in a pool of my own blood because this is a controlled environment. And then as it turns out, no, I guess not. Even here in America, this is not going to work out. Let's see. By the way, Mr. Al-Tamimi, a former member of Iraq's the Iraqi Army's elite counterterrorism service, who is now an American citizen living in Texas. Hey, I moved to Texas. Come on. Said he's been a role player in other military exercises and has never had any issues, but this one turned inexplicably brutal. They were supposed to ask me where the hostage is at, he said in an interview, but they didn't give me a chance. They just started hurting me bad. Guys, like nobody steps in and says, ho, time out. This guy is not actually an Iraqi terrorist. He's playing an Iraqi terrorist. And remember, the purpose of the exercise is for you to control yourself. Apparently not. In a memo recounting the episode, a supervisor with the F3EA, whatever that is, said, and I guess that is the contractor, the outside contractor, I suppose, hired to run the exercise, said that Mr. Heisenbein rubbed Mr. Al-Tamimi's face into a concrete pillar, kicked him, and delivered repeated hammer fist strikes to his ribs and knee strikes to his face. Another company employee involved in the exercise said the other guys realized things were going wrong and started to calm down, but Mr. Heisenbein didn't calm down. He never calmed down, he said. A third said he found Mr. Al-Tamimi face down and hogtied, moaning in pain with a pool of blood around his head. Among other injuries, Mr. Al-Tamimi was left with a broken nose, a broken tooth, a sprained shoulder, a scalp hematoma, and blunt facial trauma. According to memos and statements by company employees about the episode, he was taken to the hospital after the exercise. Mr. Al-Tamimi said Mr. Heisenbein knew that a training exercise was not supposed to happen like that. He's a man with experience, a master sergeant. He knows this is training on American soil, Mr. Al-Tamimi said. During the court-martial that followed, an expert for the defense said that based on Mr. Al-Tamimi's behavior during the exercise, Mr. Heisenbeim's actions were reasonable. Wow. The defense also asserted that a commander had pressured two soldiers to change their statements that nothing wrong had happened during the episode. A commander pressured two soldiers to change their statements. Oh, that they must have given statements that nothing wrong happened, but they were pressured into saying something bad did happen. The prosecutor's expert testified that Mr. Hassenbeim's use of knee strikes against Mr. Al-Tamimi, who lacked protective gear, amounted to excessive force. The military jury found Hassenbeim guilty of the aggravated assault charge, but acquitted him on charges of reckless endangerment. He was sentenced to no punishment. Boy, oh boy. After the court-martial proceeding, the judge discovered that one of Mr. Hassenbeim's fellow Special Forces soldiers, a friend, had repeatedly talked to a juror. Among other advice, he told the juror that physical aggression was pretty normal in training scenarios, according to the judge's decision to declare a mistrial. In his defamation case against the contractor filed in December of 2020, Hassenbeim accused the firm's employees of a conspiracy. Of course, yes. Where's my conspiracy music?
conspiracy to harm his reputation. Because everybody knew about John Hassenbeim, the Master Sergeant, who something, and later would go on to tremendous fame guarding the blackout drunk rapist guy in his tour of Capitol Hill. Mr. Parlatore, Hegseth's lawyer, said on Sunday that Hassenbeim voluntarily retired because he would not have been promoted after the criminal case. Probably not. But there's not a lot of places to go from Master Sergeant, quite honestly, unless you're extraordinarily distinguished anyway. The defamation case was dropped in September of 2021 with the agreement of both sides. After leaving the military, Hassenbeim worked for several personal security companies, according to his LinkedIn account, and a former employer. So there you go. Why he didn't go to work for role-playing training companies, I have no idea. Well, there you go. I mean, it's not directly on Hegseth, but I guess you wonder, well, did you know that? And I mean, it's of a piece of your own resentment and claims that you were wrongly treated. And I wonder if you thought you might bring this guy along for the ride. Speaking of which, I have something here from Puck News, which we don't read all that often. Is it and is it even something I can read? Is a good question. Or whether it's behind a paywall, but it looks like we can read through this thing. So we mentioned pretty close after the election that Trump was mad and thought that it should somehow be illegal or punishable by something, I don't know what, to do what that horrible criminal Ann Selzer did, right? Trump was saying, oh, that poll that Ann Selzer put out that showed that she thought, according to her survey results, that I would lose Iowa should be punishable somehow, that this was criminal election interference. I guess the theory being, well, a poll says I'm going to lose Iowa, so people will say, never mind, I'm not going to vote in Iowa because he's already lost or something like that. And therefore, right, it's just suppressing the vote. Trump supporters in Iowa weren't going to come out and vote for Trump because a pollster told them, though they hadn't already voted, it was likely that Trump was going to lose the state, and so therefore something. I mean, it's very, very far-fetched. But Trump wants to do something anyway. And in the wake of having somehow manipulated ABC News into paying him $15 million because George Stephanopoulos said a truthful thing about him on This Week, their program on their Sunday show. In every other situation prior to this one, I assume ABC News would have said, no, you can't sue us for this. That's crazy. And they'll fight it tooth and nail. But instead, they decided not to and reached a settlement, apparently for $15 million, which, by the way, keep that figure in mind. Everybody saw it. Everybody knows what it is. It's a matter of record now that there's $15 million involved. I wouldn't be surprised if you start to see Trump say not only, well, ABC News every time they ask him a question now. By the way, everybody, this is a question from ABC News, which has been found guilty in a court of law. No, not the case, but that's what I'm saying. Found guilty of lying about me. And had to pay such vicious lies, they had to pay me $15 million. I'm sure he'll be doing that, but over the course of the next couple of weeks, you'll see him saying, found guilty in court, they had to pay me $20 million, $30 million verdict against them. Criminal indictment, no, none of those things are true. The number will creep up. It was reported somewhere along the line. I didn't even grab the reference. I'm not sure whether it's the case, but apparently $15 million. Why $15 million? Probably Trump demanded $15 million. If that's the case, then it makes more sense to point out that allegedly $15 million is allegedly George Stephanopoulos' salary. I'm going to sue you for every penny you paid him. Whether or not ABC will actually then pay him the money anyway and just pay $15 million to Trump and $15 million to Stephanopoulos remains to be seen. Anyway, the point here is that Trump is on his retribution tour, it says. Oh, look, it looks like I can't read this article after all. Let me see if I can go back to the... no,
No, they have an actual robust paywall. So, okay, I was going to use them as the source for this, but I suppose I could just use anybody. We'll have to find you a different source instead. That Trump has now allegedly, having, squeezed $15 million out of ABC News, decided to file suit against Ann Selzer and the Des Moines Register and sue them for having published the crime of having conducted a poll, found that it was likely, according to their data, that he might lose the state of Iowa, which, what's the problem? So he may lose Iowa, and so what? But that is, as they say in the suit, a brazen example of campaign interference, election interference. Oh, brazen. Well, why didn't you say so? I didn't realize it was brazen. Now we really have to do something about it. It seems like a pretty dumb and frivolous filing, but I guess in the wake of the ABC News thing, we now have to watch and see. Does the Des Moines Register, which surely has far less resources at its command for defense than ABC News does, do they take the easy way out and say, well, we'll take a settlement and at least that way know how much money we're going to lose up front and pay it? Or do we take our chances in court and maybe even win, but spend untold amounts on our legal defense? That's the decision that everybody is being asked to make here. And by the way, let me just throw this in there if you're one of the legal decision makers. I don't know that $15 million is all that ABC News is going to be required to pay here. The settlement may or may not be for $15 million. But once you give a guy like Donald Trump a $15 million payday, he's just going to, file something else against you and try and get you to pay again because he sees that it works the first time. It might not be immediate. He might wait or go through all the rest of the news organizations to try to cow them all first. But he'll eventually come back to ABC News and demand more tribute, just as he'll demand more tribute from the people who gave him $1 million to his inaugural fund in the last couple of days. All right, I'll find you another source for the Selzer lawsuit, because it's out there. It's all over those. That just happened to be the one that I put aside, but they're protected by a paywall. Just wanted you to know that was happening, and it's ridiculous, and we'll have to see whether the Des Moines Register either says, we don't have the resources to defend ourselves the same way that ABC News did, but we also don't have the ability to settle for the amount of money that he will demand. So we're just going to have to go to trial and take our chances and then try and recover attorney's fees in the end when this frivolous lawsuit is dismissed. ABC could absolutely have gone the same route. They just don't know why, but they chose not to. All right, let's see. Other things that we might want to squeeze in to today's show. Well, let me read you a little bit about something I hinted at yesterday. And it didn't leave myself time to discuss it yesterday, but let's give it a shot anyway. Just to give you a flavor of what's going on here, I told you that there was some weirdness about Tiffany Trump's father-in-law, Mossad Boulos, and his claim to be a billionaire, which is, of course, perhaps less important than the fact that he has been relying on that claim and the nepotism thing to get himself a plum spot in a non-Senate confirmed made-up role in the Trump administration. All right. So Trump's Middle East advisor pick is a small-time truck salesman, which great. Good. We need more small-time truck salesmen involved in things, I guess. But President-elect Donald Trump's incoming Middle East advisor. Oh, well, then why is he that? Well, because he's kind of Middle Eastern himself. Mossad Boulos has enjoyed a reputation as a billionaire mogul at the helm of a business that bears his family name. Mr. Boulos, B-O-U-L-O-S, has been profiled as a tycoon by the world's media, telling a reporter in October that his company is worth billions. Mr. Trump called him a highly respected leader in the business world with extensive experience on the international scene. The president-elect even lavished what may be his highest praise. He's a, quote, deal maker. In fact, records show that Mr. Boulos has spent the past 2 decades
selling trucks and heavy machinery in Nigeria for a company that his father-in-law controls. So this is Tiffany's father-in-law's father-in-law who's in control of this company. And selling trucks and heavy machinery is fine vocation. In Nigeria, fine as well. It's just not what he says that it was. And Nigeria, by the way, not in the Middle East. He is the chief executive of a company, SCOA Nigeria PLC. Nondescript sounding, which made a profit of less than $66,000 last year, corporate filings show. So I don't know about that worth $1 billion thing. You know, just another lie, but whatever. There's no indication in corporate documents that Mr. Boulos, a Lebanese American whose son is married to Mr. Trump's daughter, Tiffany, it's all real, is a man of significant wealth as a result of his business. The truck dealership is valued at about $865,000 at its current share price, and that's the whole thing, if you own the whole thing. Mr. Boulos' stake, according to securities filings, is worth, are you ready for this one, $1.53. Now, I'm worth more than that, right? Okay, come on, everybody. As for Boulos Enterprises, which is not the name of the company that he's in control of, right? As for Boulos Enterprises, the company that has been called his family business in the Financial Times and elsewhere, a company officer there said it's owned by an unrelated Boulos family. How do you like that? Mr. Boulos will advise on one of the world's most complicated and conflict-racked regions, a region that Mr. Boulos said this week that he has not visited in years. The advisory position, by the way, does not require Senate approval, so don't worry about that. The confusion over Mr. Boulos' background and his failure for years to clear up that wacky misunderstanding, until questioned this week by the Times, raises questions about how thoroughly Mr. Trump's team vetted his nominees. The team was caught by surprise by allegations of sexual misconduct against Pete Hegseth. No, they weren't. The pick for defense secretary, a spokeswoman for the Trump transition team, declined to comment. Mr. Boulos, a Christian from northern Lebanon who emigrated to Texas as a teenager, has risen in prominence since 2018 when his son Michael began dating Tiffany Trump. I guess there's still the mystery of how it is that she ended up with what was alleged to be a $1 million engagement ring, but ultimately, who cares?
From networksradio.com.
I mean, we're out of time.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
I will tell you who's not out of time. It's Justice Putnam, because the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy comes next right here on Netroots Radio. Here's what he's got on tap, or at least some of it. Trump will no doubt be taking credit for Biden's economic policies. And then around the country, elsewhere, New Orleans insists that its police department is ready to end federal oversight, but not all are convinced. We'll see you tomorrow.